The winds rolled across the fjord like the growls of ancient beasts, rattling the wooden beams of the solitary house perched on the rocky hill. Gunnar sat by the hearth, his massive frame hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the dancing flames. The fire cracked and spat, sending sparks toward the smoke hole above, but the heat never reached the hollow inside his chest. He was 40 winters old, a warrior whose name had once been shouted in mead halls, a giant whose arms had swung axes in bloody raids across the sea. But here, in the silence of his own home, he was nothing but a man alone, untouched by love and cursed with solitude. He could still recall the laughter of comrades, voices echoing in longhouses as they boasted of their wives and their sons. He had joined their feasts, smiled at their joy, even carved toys for their children with his rough hands, though his own hearth remained cold. Women avoided him, not because he was poor, nor because he lacked valor, but because he was too much. Too tall, too broad, with hands large enough to crush a man's skull and a voice that rumbled like thunder. His presence filled every space until others shrank in comparison. They whispered behind his back, calling him, the virgin giant. Some said it in jest, others with pity, but Gunnar never answered. He fought their battles and guarded their homes, and then returned to his lonely hall when the mead was gone. He told himself he did not need anyone. His life was steel, wood, and sea. His heart was a fortress, and his soul was trained to endure. But when the nights grew long and the snow piled thick against the door, there were moments he admitted the truth. He yearned for warmth, not of fire, but of another soul beside his. Still, he did nothing. Fear was not something Gunnar ever admitted to, but deep inside, he feared tenderness more than he feared any sword. What if he crushed what he longed to hold? What if he frightened away the one thing he sought? And so he sat, year after year, with only silence for company. That night, as the snowstorm raged outside, the wind carried a sound he had not heard in many winters, a knock. It was faint at first, muffled by the storm, then sharper, 3 firm raps against his wooden door. Gunnar straightened slowly, his head tilting toward the sound. Few dared climb this hill in the dead of winter, and fewer still would come knocking at a warrior's home uninvited. Rising to his full height, he moved toward the door, each step heavy, the floor creaking under his weight. He unlatched the bar and pulled the thick wood open, expecting perhaps a lost hunter or a traveler begging for shelter. Instead, what stood before him made him pause. A woman. She was broad-shouldered and heavy-set, her fur cloak damp from snow and too thin for the storm that howled behind her. Her cheeks were flushed crimson from the cold, her breath rising in clouds, and her dark hair was tangled by the wind. Yet her eyes, clear, sharp, and burning with something more than desperation, held his gaze without a flicker of fear. She looked up, far up, to meet his towering presence and said, with no hesitation in her voice, "Warrior, I need shelter. And perhaps, I bring more than that." The words struck him like an axe to a shield. His brows knit together, and for the first time in years, he was at a loss. Few spoke to him without trembling. Fewer still came to his door willingly. His voice, deep and rough from disuse, rumbled like distant thunder. "Who are you, woman, that you knock upon the door of a lonely giant?" The woman straightened her back, her bearing proud despite the storm and her weariness. Her cloak slipped slightly, revealing thick arms hardened not by luxury but by years of work, hauling nets, chopping wood. Living hard, she did not flinch under his gaze. "I am Astrid," she said, her tone steady. "Widow of Torvald the fisherman. I have lived alone since the sea took him, but I will not live alone any longer. They say you live here, Gunnar, apart from all others." "Alone, as I am. And so I have come." Gunnar's chest tightened, the fire inside his hall forgotten. He had faced men with swords, beasts with claws, storms that could sink a longship, yet nothing had unsettled him like this woman's bold words. He had expected fear, pity, perhaps mockery. Instead, he was met with fire, and it left him unarmored. Snow whirled behind her, coating her hair and cloak, but she did not move from the doorway. She looked at him as though she already knew his soul, as though she had walked through the walls he had built around his heart. For a moment, Gunnar thought to send her away. He had no practice in sharing his hall, no training in tenderness, but his voice betrayed him. "Astrid," he repeated, the name awkward but warm on his tongue. "You knock upon the door of a man who has nothing to offer but solitude and strength. Why come here, to me?" Her lips curved in a faint smile, weary but unyielding. "Because strength is not nothing. And solitude can be broken. You think you are a fortress, Gunnar, but even the tallest walls need warmth within. And before he could gather words to answer, she stepped past him, her heavy boots thudding on his wooden floor, bringing with her the scent of snow and sea and something else, something alive. The giant warrior stood frozen, staring at the door she had so easily crossed, the silence he had lived with shattered in an instant. The fire snapped and hissed, throwing flickers of light across the wooden beams of the hall. Gunnar stood awkwardly near the doorway, still bewildered by what had just happened. Astrid, the widow, moved through his home as though she had every right to be there, her fur cloak slipping from her shoulders to reveal her thick frame and the sturdy movements of a woman who had carried her own burdens for too long. She rubbed her hands together briskly, then knelt by the fire to warm them, her cheeks glowing from the heat. Gunnar, unused to any presence in his hall, shifted uncomfortably. His home was built for one man, one chair, one bed, one table. There was no softness, no tapestry, no sign of a woman's touch. He realized, with sudden embarrassment, how bare and joyless it looked now that someone else's eyes were upon it. He cleared his throat, the sound rumbling like distant thunder. You should not have come here in such a storm. The path is treacherous. Astrid looked over her shoulder, her dark eyes catching the firelight. The storm outside is nothing compared to the storm inside an empty home, she said simply, then turned back to the flames, spreading her hands as if to claim warmth not only for her skin but for her spirit. You think solitude is strength, but I tell you, solitude is rot. It eats away at the heart until nothing but silence remains. Her words struck him deeper than any blade. He wanted to argue, to remind her that he had endured 40 years without breaking, but something inside told him she was right. His silence was not victory, it was a wound that had never healed. He stepped forward, the floor creaking beneath his weight, and sank into the chair across from her. His size made the chair look small, and yet he seemed smaller than usual, humbled in her presence. He studied her quietly. She was not like the women he remembered from feasts, those who braided their hair in gold or wore dresses of fine wool. Astrid's hands were rough, her body full, her face lined by hardship. But there was strength in her posture, resilience in the way she held herself, and fire in her eyes that no winter could extinguish. You speak boldly to a man you do not know, Gunnar said at last, his voice low. Astrid's lips quirked into a half-smile. I know more of you than you think. The village whispers about the giant who lives alone. They say your arms are strong enough to split mountains, but your heart has never known a woman. They pity you. Some laugh, but I hear the truth behind their whispers. You are not unloved, Gunnar, you are untouched. That is a different thing entirely. The words made his skin burn with shame and strange relief. To hear her say aloud what had haunted him in silence was both unbearable and liberating. His hands, massive and scarred, clenched on his knees, then loosened again. You are not afraid of me? He asked, almost a whisper. Astrid rose from where she had been kneeling and walked to him with the steady steps of someone who feared neither storm nor man. She stood before him, shorter by several feet, yet her presence filled the hall as surely as his did. Without asking, she took his hand in both of hers. His palm engulfed her fingers, his skin calloused and rough against her warmth. You will not break me, Gunnar, she said firmly, as if she had read his unspoken fear. I have been broken already, by the sea that stole my husband, by winters that bit at my bones, by years of carrying life's burdens alone. Yet here I stand, whole enough to choose again. Do not think yourself too great or too dangerous. You are a man, nothing less, nothing more. And I have come to you not because I pity you, but because I see you. The firelight glowed against her face, softening the weariness etched in her features, making her look almost fierce with truth. Gunnar felt his chest tighten, not with the wild heat of battle, but with a tenderness he had never known. It terrified him, and yet he could not turn away. Why me? He asked, his voice raw, as though torn from deep within. There are men younger, men less scarred, men who know how to smile and laugh. Why come to a giant who has lived too long with nothing but silence? Astrid held his gaze, unflinching. Because you are alone, as I am. Because I have no use for men who chase laughter but cannot bear grief. Because I am not afraid of your size, and you are not disgusted by mine. Because, perhaps, I believe even giants need love. For a long moment, the hall was silent except for the fire. Gunnar's breath came slow and heavy, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. He looked down at their joined hands, her fingers gripping his as though anchoring him to the earth. No one had ever touched him this way, not in fear, not in pity, but with the steady strength of one who knew her own worth. A strange sound left him then, awkward and uncertain, a laugh, though quiet and rough, as if he had forgotten how it was meant to sound. Astrid's face softened, and she smiled, the corners of her mouth curving warmly. In that moment, something shifted in the hall. It was no longer a place of exile, but a hearth that glowed with the promise of more. Outside, snow buried the world in silence. Inside, warmth bloomed, not only from the fire but from the fragile thread that now bound two souls who had been too long alone. Gunnar, the virgin giant, and Astrid, the widow, sat by the flames, no longer strangers, but no longer entirely solitary either. The fortress of his heart had found its first crack, and through it, warmth began to seep in.